So yeah, here it is. Homeless refugees are creating an utterly untenable situation for Glasgow City Council. We look at why this is and how the outdated refugee system is working against the best interests of the native population. The refugees are always destined to be top of the housing list, and we propose the obvious solutions. And we take it from the top because there's so many people confuse the terms. And one of the confusing terms is illegal immigrants. We tend to look on everybody who crosses the channel as illegal, but that's a confusion of terms because they are actually legal. They are exercising their legal right under Britain's membership of the UN Refugee Convention. That's why we need to leave the UN Refugee Convention so that we can make them genuinely illegal. But so long as we remain part of the UN Refugee Convention, then these immigrants are to be considered, to all intents and purposes, by every single lawyer and court and politician in Britain. They have to be considered legal asylum seekers. They then go to the hotels, as I say. If their claim is granted, they then become an official refugee, which again is another legal status. And we would argue that there should be very, 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 very few people ever getting to the refugee status, because most of them should be turned away. But we don't turn them away because it's extremely difficult to turn them away so long as we are members of the UN Refugee Convention. But if we come out of the UN Refugee Convention, then we will be free to criminalize the channel traffic. We'll be free to criminalize that and say, if you cross on a little dinghy, you're getting picked up and you're getting taken to a detention camp where you will stay until you self-deport or until you agree to be officially deported. And that's the only way that we're going to stop the channel traffic. And that's been known by us since 2018. But it's time now to make that better known. And we explain here how a refugee must find their own accommodation and how that is, of course, very, very difficult for somebody that speaks no English and doesn't have a job or a bank account. In fact, it's an absurd thing to ask somebody to do. So they end up living at our expense in social housing, destined probably forever to remain there at our expense. We explain how councils will prioritise the homeless over those on the housing list. And then we explain where we got the figures that refugees are over 70% of the homeless in Glasgow. And how we've discovered that they're getting half the new social housing flats in Glasgow as well. And we give chapter and verse here where it's all been said. And we point out that, for example, Glasgow City Council won't address the source of the problem, the never-ending supply of asylum seekers into the UK, who, if their claims are accepted, then turn up in Glasgow as official refugees. And we point out the solution. Firstly, we need to leave the UN Refugee Convention, which requires us to give refugees access to the benefits system on the same terms as British citizens. Once we leave the UN Refugee Convention, we will be free to ensure that refugees are not able to access benefits and social housing, at least not on the same terms as the indigenous British, and that they will be required to pay their own way. And if they cannot, which most of them will not be able to do, then they must go somewhere else, which will accommodate them. But what we'll find also when we remove access to benefits and social housing is that many of them will no longer want to claim asylum after all. That in itself will disincentivize a lot of people from coming here. And thirdly, refugee status should never be a pathway to indefinite leave to remain. It should never be a pathway to citizenship, never be a pathway to any kind of permanent settlement. And removing the asylum refugee pathway to permanent settlement will also disincentivize many from claiming asylum in the first place. Far, far fewer people will want to come over if we do that. So it's all there. It's all very good. We might include this as a chapter in the new book, but it's there for anybody with the desire to find out what is actually going on. But it is an absurd situation, because so long as we're tied up into the system, so long as we're literally churning out official legal refugees into society every single day, then we are ensuring that the British people on the housing list will have to be put second, third, fourth, fifth, and ultimately 1 millionth last, because the councils will prioritise those people who are presenting as homeless.